Welcome to the Policy Project, brought to you by Policybazaar.ae. Here's a place where we take something like life insurance and make it sound less like a calculation, more like a conversation. And don't we all need that? Well, today we're here to answer what seems like a basic question, but it's got so many options. How much life insurance do we really need? Is it 10 times our salary? Is it 5 times our salary? Is it a random number that a friend said at a party once? Or is it meant to reflect something deeper, like the way we value life? Well, to help us decode all of that, we've got Neeraj Gupta, who is the CEO of Policybazaar.ae with us. Welcome onto the show, Neeraj.
Hi, thanks, Malvika. Glad to be here.
I know that you've spent years simplifying this very complex world of insurance for customers. So I hope to hear so much from you. And I've got Adel Benachour with us as well, who's the head of life and health insurance at HAYAH Insurance, a company that's redefining what protection really means in this digital age.
Hi. Thanks for having me. Thanks, everyone.
Well, Neeraj, I'm going to start with you. Let's start with the basics. Why do most people get this question wrong?
See, if you look at life insurance, the people are confused about it. Why? Because they're looking at it more from protection perspective on their liability side, right? But life insurance is generally not just protecting yourself from your liabilities, but it is also to give you support and the freedom to continue living your lifestyle or your family's lifestyle the way it is. And that is where a lot of people do the mistake. They calculate their liabilities typically, and they say, okay, these are my liabilities and this is what I need coverage for. But they forget what their future earnings potentials are. And basis that you build your life on, right? For example, anybody earning a salary here, typically, whenever he does his financial calculation for the future, he typically would sit around and say, okay, I'll work till 60, earn this much income, have my savings, and basis that I will build my lifestyle. That's the real way of doing it. But what happens when you're not there after 40, right? What happens to your future income? That is where you need to protect for. So life insurance does not need to be looked at as only a protection against your liabilities, but protecting your happiness or your family's happiness and their lifestyle.
Okay, that's interesting. Adel, is there a starting point, maybe a rule of thumb that we can use as a starting point for this?
I'm not a big fan of rule of thumbs and throwing numbers, to be honest. If we were to start somewhere, I think if we consider anything between 10 times to 15 times your annual income, annual salary, I should say, to be precise, that should be a good starting point, and I would say a sound rule of thumb to reuse those words. However, having said that, please don't take it wrong. We also need, as Neeraj mentioned right now, we also need to consider the liabilities. If you have loans, if you have cards, those ones need to be, of course, repaid. Most importantly, if you have a family and you have dependent like kids, the cost of education is increasing year on year. So those elements have to be factored, obviously, when you consider the overall amount you want to be protected for in the future.
Neeraj, you often talk about insuring your dreams, not just your debts. What does that even mean?
So as I explained earlier, right, let's take a live example, right? There's a person who's at 35-year-old. He earns a certain income and he's planning his future with the wife and the kids, that he'll stay or he'll work till 60, have some income till 60, and will have savings, will do some investments and so on and so forth, right? Now you're planning about your kids' education. Okay, he'll have education till probably 12th, 13th or year 12, year 13. And then he'll go to university, probably in UAE or outside UAE. So you need expenses for your graduation, then probably post-graduation. In the meantime, you're also planning to buy a house. So these are all dreams, right? Dreams and aspirations. So what I mean by protecting your dreams is by securing this future, because if you're not there, your families will still have their aspirations. They will still want to go in steady. I know money cannot give you that emotional support, but it can give you that financial support to continue to live your dream and not necessarily just protect your liabilities or whatever loans you have. That's what I mean by that.
And that's such a great way of looking at things. Adel, in your experience, do people often underestimate their coverage needs?
I should unfortunately say yes, and it's not rare. Actually, it's very often people underestimate their needs, and for various reasons. The first one, I mean, we are all humans, so we have to cope with the daily livings. We have rent, we have utilities, we have the educational fees, again, that we have to pay and consider on the short term. So that leaves us very less space, I would say, in our mind to plan for what we call this future and to protect ourselves and to protect our dependents. what seems to be, I would say, a decent and reasonable amount that you can consider today is absolutely not the case tomorrow. Let me take an example to illustrate that. Let's say you consider having coverage of $1 million, whatever currency. It can be dirhams, it can be euros, dollars, it doesn't really matter. 1 million is already a pretty decent amount. But in 10, 15 years, if you take into considerations today the economic of the country in the UAE, there is an inflation rate of roughly 2.1, 2.2%. This 1 million is becoming 1.35 to 1.4 million in the next 10 to 15 years. So you see that here we're talking about a spread. There's a gap of coverage of 30 to 40%. So that's why it's important to consider the overall economics and the overall environment, your own specifics, when you assess this amount that you want to be covered for.
So Neeraj, tell me how Policybazaar.ae will help me calculate this amount for myself annually.
So obviously we've built calculators which will take into account what all your liabilities are, whatever your loans are, whatever your credit card outstandings are, and then your future goals, right? The education expenses, your probably the house you want to buy or the vacation you want to take or the car you want to buy. All those future aspirations they'll take into account and probably help you with that. But most importantly, we have qualified advisors who will work with you, who will speak to you, and who will guide you through the entire process. See, as my friend Adel mentioned, right, a lot of people underplan. And if you look at expenses, they have a funny way of going beyond what you plan for. And whereas when you talk about securing it, you typically under-secure yourself, right? So there's a massive gap. And a lot of people underestimate the power of compounding. What that means is if the inflation is at about 2%, 3%, then it compounds. As Adel mentioned, 1 million anything which costs you 1 million will start to cost you about 1.4 million. And this is what you don't plan while you're securing your future. And that is where our advisors at Policybazaar.ae will handhold you through the entire process and the journey of buying the right life insurance for you.
Adel, I know that some employers offer insurance cover to their employees. And what advice would you have for people who feel like, well, I'm already covered, my employer's got it sorted?
So it's a good question, actually. It's a very good one, especially in the last few years, where under the pulse of governmental, I would say, incentives and regulation, the market has become, I would say, stricter. Companies are offering more robust and more comprehensive plans. Having said that, I should insist on the fact that those plans remains as valid as long as you are an employee. The moment you leave your employer, you're not covered anymore. So, we're covering what we call unexpected risks. So you have to be very careful when you go that route. That's why we keep on assisting with the proper advice to have your own insurance covered that is tailored for your own risk, your own specific, your own profile. That gives you the peace of mind for at least the next 10, 20, 30 years. So you can plan accordingly the rest of your life.
Well, that's incredible. What I'm taking away from this conversation is that unfortunately, there is no magic number. There's no one figure that you can sort of copy paste from a friend's life onto yours and say, this is going to be enough. It's about building your own financial safety net. It's about understanding who you are, what your dreams are, what your family's needs are, and really what your family would need if you weren't around tomorrow, God forbid. You think about your children's education, you think about your mortgage, you think about your goals, your dreams, your life, and that's your number. I know it sounds complicated, but you can just log on to Policybazaar.ae and they've got a calculator there. Just run the numbers and in a few clicks, that answer could be as easy as a couple of digits on your screen. Thank you so much, Neeraj.
Thank you for having me here. Thank you so much.
And thank you so much, Adel, for bringing so much of clarity and ease to this conversation.
Thank you. Thanks again for having me. Thank you.
Well, that was the Policy Project, brought to you by Policybazaar.ae. We hope that this conversation was useful and we took life insurance and made it a conversation from a calculation. Thanks for watching.